and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Arabiya English. I'm Tom Burges Watson, and today our focus is on India and the continuing fallout from the tariffs imposed by the US Trump administration. We'll also be speaking to a leading Indian MP, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, and the former Indian ambassador to the United States about that situation. Plus, we'll speak to the former NATO Secretary General Alessandro Minuto-Rizzo about the situation in Ukraine and how he rates the chances of peace being brokered by President Trump. We'll also be discussing the overall security situation in Iraq with a special advisor to the Iraqi Prime Minister. All of that to come on GNT today. Hello and welcome to the program. We begin in China, where the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been emphasizing his commitment to improving ties with Beijing. Well, this comes as relations with the United States continue to sour. Well, experts say US-India relations are at their lowest point in 25 years, so bad, in fact, that it's been reported that Prime Minister Modi is refusing to take calls from President Trump and has done so for more than 2 months now. Well, President Trump recently imposed a 50% tariff on Indian goods and called trade ties with India a totally one-sided disaster. Well, let's get more analysis now. We can speak to Dr. Shashi Tharoor, who is an Indian MP for Lok Sabha, who joins us now from New Delhi. Dr. Tharoor, thank you very much for joining us once again here on Arabiya English. I want to start by talking to you about the summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is being held in the Chinese city of Tianjin. And at that summit, I'm sure you saw the pictures, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi holding hands with President Putin, talking about a special relationship. What do we read into that, and what's the message the Indian Prime Minister is sending out to the world here?
Well, look, I mean, to begin with, it's his first visit to China in 7 years, which is a message in itself. There has been, as you probably are aware, a rather deep sort of freeze in our relationship, which really sunk to a nadir back in May of 2020, May and early June, when the Chinese, in an unprovoked confrontation on the line of control, the undefined frontier between the two countries, killed 20 soldiers, Indian soldiers. And that was a huge incident, as a result of which India froze flights to China, cut back on a number of contacts, canceled a number of Chinese investments, reduced Chinese visas, banned TikTok in India, all sorts of things. And there was a deep freeze that went on till about late last year, when roughly around October of 2024, a series of meetings at the foreign minister level and the national security advisor level began a slow thaw. But that thaw had barely got underway when the conflict with Pakistan saw China arraigned completely on Pakistan's side, and that in turn again was a setback. But I think in the meantime, two things have happened. The SCO was an opportunity to attempt to continue with the thaw that had begun last year, and I think the government saw it as such, and Mr. Modi might well have chosen to go anyway and accept that invitation. But then Mr. Trump's tariffs, which have been absolutely stinging on India. We are the most tariffed nation in the world alongside Brazil. 50% is what Indian exporters are being charged for their goods. And as a result, companies are having orders cancelled. Factories are laying off workers. We're having quite a serious impact in India. At that point, the imperative need to shore up relationships with other countries, other investors, other markets became much more urgent. So I think you've got a complicated message. And you know, one is seeing in this a sort of pivot from confrontation to conversation between India and China. As for Russia, Mr. Putin was also there, that's a long-standing relationship. It's had minor ups and downs, but I think by and large it has been a steady relationship. The main difference in recent years has been that India has gotten closer to America and Russia has become more dependent on China, particularly after the Ukraine war. And that was likely to have created a bit of estrangement, slightly, between India and Russia. But now in the revised circumstances, I think there's no talk of estrangement. There's only warmth and friendship. Mr. Modi has been to Moscow last year. Mr. Putin is coming to New Delhi later this year. And I think we're looking at a change. So India is clearly shoring up its relationships with old friends and would-be new friends in Russia and China, respectively, particularly as a bulwark against all the uncertainties that the Trump tempest has unleashed on India in recent weeks.
Okay, well, let's talk a bit more about that Trump tempest and these new friends. So President Xi and President Putin have been holding talks on the sidelines of that conference in China with your Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And there are these concerns in Washington that this trade standoff is having the effect of drawing India closer to those two countries. And it sounds like you believe that is, in fact, partially the case.
I think it's partially the case. I don't think either country would actually situate it in that context. But for anyone looking at it, it's inescapable, the context. Given the fact that the thaw that, as I mentioned, began late last year had already slowed down because of the stepping back as a result of the conflict with Pakistan, in which China offered real-time military assistance to Pakistan, as well as diplomatic support in the Security Council and elsewhere. Given all of that, things were not exactly thawing the way they might have. And had Mr. Trump not done what he'd done, there would certainly have been a slightly more formal, slightly more distant approach. But I think right now, India understands, number one, that it needs China as it needs many other countries. And China understands that this is not a bad time to be talking to India, because India is approaching it from a position of weakness, from, as we say in cricket, from being on the back foot. And I think that's something which gives each side an incentive to do some serious talking.
I think there will be some more cricketing analogies as the conversation goes on, because you've written a piece that is riddled with cricketing analogies and metaphors. But we're going to come back. We're going to come to that. We're going to come to that in just a moment. But I just wonder what.
But I mean, just to add to what we were saying, Tom, Indian pilgrims have started returning to Hindu and Buddhist sites in Tibet. Direct flights are resuming. They've been announced already. Therefore, visa restrictions are also easing. And both nations are orchestrating a flurry of high-level exchanges to formalize this thaw. So I think that there's clearly a shared intent to move beyond the recriminations of the past and to reimagine the relationship. So though the fault lines have been more apparent than the possible areas of convergence, India and China are certainly both making steps towards each other.
Okay, let's talk about the underlying causes of this spat with the United States. The Trump administration accuses Russia of selling oil to countries like India and China as well, using these dark fleets. And that money is funding Russia's war effort in Ukraine. I want to ask you, is that happening? And is, in your opinion, Washington justifiably irritated that that's happening?
Well, absolutely. It is happening. The 50% tariffs kicked in on the 27th, just after midnight, or the 26th night of August in American time. So we've actually been under those sanctions for 5 or 6 days already. But I do want to say that it's completely unjustified for multiple reasons. Number one is, of course, that who you trade with is a sovereign decision of any nation. No one in America would allow anybody to presume to tell them whom they can and cannot trade with. And the only constraint that India or any other sovereign nation has historically been willing to observe is of the UN Security Council sanctions a particular country. Then it's where all, as UN members, expected to go along with that. But there is no UN sanction on Russia. Secondly, there is the fact that the EU is actually purchasing far more from Russia. In other words, they're sending more dollars to Russia than India is. We spend about $53 billion on Russia, basically oil and gas. The EU spends $67 to $68 billion every year. I'm talking of last year's figures, on a whole variety of other items that they buy from Russia. Thirdly, China buys far more oil and gas than we do. But America can't dare to sanction China with an extra 25%, because they know that the Chinese can withhold rare earth magnets and other vital materials and God knows what else that the American economy needs. And so the problem with India is that India essentially is unable to conduct any reprisals against this punitive or vindictive action by America, because the only way we can do so would be to hurt our own producers, who are already hurting in terms of those items that the Americans have sanctioned. Because there are a couple of items that we are selling the Americans that have not yet had a tariff slapped on them. One is pharmaceuticals. We are the world's leading supplier of pharmaceuticals, even more than China. And so the average American going to his pharmacy for his headache remedy may have a bigger headache if the prices go up. And so they've been hesitating to sanction or tariff Indian pharmaceuticals so far anyway. And the other one is the electronics. We manufacture 60% of the Apple iPhones sold in America. 60% of the Apple iPhone 17 was slated to be shipped from here. And that's going to be something which I think would complicate relations not only with the American consumer, but also with this major American company. So they're going to still work that out. But those two things are still not tariffed. Everything else, all our leather goods, our textiles and garments, our seafood exports, shrimp and so on, and our gems and jewelry, where India was a world leader in terms of affordable gems and jewelry, diamond cutting and polishing, jewelry design, all of that. All of those have already taken a very bad hit from the initial 20%, 25%, and now the additional 25% sanctions. So that's 50% already. There's stories of 150,000 Indian gem and jewelry workers being laid off in Mr. Modi's home state of Gujarat. So it really does hurt. Real people are losing real jobs because of the temper tantrum from Washington.
Okay, I mean, you've described the sanctions as stinging sanctions, and you paint a picture there of a situation in which livelihoods are being severely affected by decisions being taken in Washington and by the Indian government. I mean, what does the Indian public make of all of this? Do you get the impression there's growing anger? Is that a risk?
Oh, yeah, no, there's very serious anger because the Indian public, don't forget, after 200 years of colonialism, Tom, we are not prepared to be dictated to by any foreign power. It's just, our strategic autonomy has been a fundamental tenet of our foreign policy under all governments. And we've had various parties in office at various times. No one has moved under. No one has buckled under. Strategic dignity matters to us. We are consistently championing a rules-based international order, unilaterally imposing tariffs, especially telling you who you can and cannot buy oil or anything from, flies in the face of our principles. We will not surrender our right to conduct our foreign policy based on our national interests. So I think you will see from India, with massive popular support, strategic resolve and diplomatic firmness. I mean, we value our partnership with the US, but our foreign policy choices are non-negotiable and can be dictated solely by our national interests. I think we'll continue negotiating with the Americans in trade negotiations if they're willing to talk. They actually suspended the last round on the 25th of August, where an American trade delegation was due in Delhi to continue trade talks, and they decided not to come. So if they don't want to talk, then they can't be a negotiation. But otherwise, we will be happy to negotiate with them, but we won't compromise on some issues that matter to us. For example, in a democracy like India, anything that is seen as harming the interests of our 700 million farmers or 700 million people living off agriculture is simply a non-starter for any elected government.
Okay.
The farmers represent an extremely powerful voting bloc in the country and across the country. So we will not grant market access to much of our agricultural sectors, and the Americans better understand that if the price of that is they're going to give us some unreasonable tariffs, well, then they'll simply end up losing our products. It's as simple as that. There's also been pressure on data localization. We're not convinced we need to do that. So there's some issues. I think there are other things we could have negotiated. Americans want to sell us Cadillacs, luxury automobiles. I suspect that we're willing to give a little bit on that because it's a very small market for that kind of car, and it won't be upsetting the entire sort of Indian marketplace. I think we can be a little more accommodating of some of the American export interests. Maybe Indians who are notoriously fond of Scotch whiskey might develop a taste for bourbon if we can work out a deal with America on that. So there are that kind of that kind of negotiation is always possible. But I must tell you that it's got to be a negotiation. It can't be a unilateral diktat. We know the US is a crucial market, but we're going to be redoubling our efforts to strengthen our trade ties with other significant economies. The EU, we're already negotiating an FTA with the EU. The UK, we've got an FTA concluded last month. Japan, ASEAN, partners in the global south, including Africa. I think we are going to be diversifying a lot more to reduce our over-reliance on any single market and to build resilience against the unpredictable unilateral actions, that kind of thing coming again from Washington. And we also have to do something about our domestic competitiveness and strengthening. I think we need to focus on improving our internal practices, our logistics, the cost of doing business, the ease of doing business, the productivity of our labor force. And there are things we can do to get our act together a little better at home. We can't just compete purely on low wages. We need to invest on skills, on technology, on infrastructure. We got to make our products globally competitive, even in the face of whatever tariffs we finally end up with, which I hope certainly will not be anything like 50, well, should ideally be around or lower than 20. Then we will be able to compete with other Asian countries and other countries generally that are also being tariffed at between 15 and 19% these days by the Americans. That could be fine. And we can also do a strategic review of our own tariff structures to ensure that they're actually serving our economic goals. Mr. Trump keeps complaining that our tariffs are too high. Our average tariffs in America are just 17%. So American tariffs are actually higher on Indian goods and Indian tariffs are on American goods. But we can still look at that. We can see where we can ease things, as I said, on a sector by sector, item by item basis. Let's see. Okay. My own gut feeling about all of this is these actions by President Trump are testing our resolve, testing our proud history of strategic independence, and we're not going to capitulate. We will have to seriously consider how best we respond. And my gut feeling on all of this is we will be able to, but we're not going to sacrifice our strategic autonomy even for short-term economic relief. That would be a betrayal of what every Indian would agree is our national interest. We'll have to stand firm, we'll have to negotiate hard, we'll have to diversify strategically, and we'll have to emerge from all of the Trumpian tariffs as an even stronger and more self-reliant nation. That would be my message, Tom.
All right. It sounds. I don't think Americans are very familiar with cricketing terminology. So saying that India is going to dig in for a long innings, which is what it looks like Prime Minister Modi is doing. It sounds like that's what you're advocating. Putting that in Mr. Trump's more sort of familiar language, the language of baseball, sounds like you advocate playing hardball.
Hardball, but not going for home runs of the first shot. I think we have to recognize that, stealing the occasional base is the best thing we can do, if that metaphor works.
It sounds as though, just reading what President Trump put out on social media last night, on Truth Social, he said, India is making concessions. He says they have now offered to cut their tariffs to nothing, but it's getting late. They should have done this years ago. Do you read this as a softening of President Trump's stance? And do you think perhaps those pictures, do you think those pictures in China rattled him?
No, I think it could well have done. And certainly if he says it's getting late, that means there's still room for compromise. If he says it is too late, that means he's playing hardball. So that getting late is, I think, a fairly encouraging turn of phrase, and it may suggest there's some room for maneuver.
Okay. Are you hopeful that a negotiated solution is going to be found?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, Tom?
Are you hopeful that a negotiated solution is going to be found?
Well, look, there are two parts to this particular problem. There is, first of all, the base 25% tariffs, which are higher than most of our competitors for similar labor-intensive items. So you can't compete with Thailand on gems and jewelry, with Vietnam or Bangladesh on garments, with many Southeast Asian countries on seafood exports. At 25, if those countries are only paying tariffs of between 15 and 19, because that gives you a 6% premium that makes it very difficult for Indian exporters to attract their American buyers. Then there's a second 25%, which is the sanctions on India for purchasing Russian oil. I think that second 25% can be waved off by Mr. Trump with a wave of the wand saying we made our point and we'll take it off. because he's now focused in his yesterday's post on Truth Social only on the basic tariffs, which is the first 25. And there, if we can negotiate down, if we can, we haven't reduced everything to zero, I know, but if we can reduce some to zero and some to lower numbers and come to a compromise with America, maybe we can end up also at a lower number than 25. Maybe we can come to 15, 16, 17. Anything up to 19, I think, would still enable us to compete with other Asian countries who are exporting the same kinds of goods to America. But the sanction 25 is a political policy. He sanctioned us, he hasn't sanctioned China, he hasn't sanctioned the EU. He's got to decide whether the relationship with India is so unimportant to him that sanctioning India by that extra 25 is worth it. If he decides on second thoughts he doesn't want to throw India aside and he wants to preserve the relationship, then I think he can certainly knock the second 25 off, and then the trade negotiators can work out a deal on the first 25. That's the way I see a possible outcome. And it'll all have to happen in the next few weeks because it's already hurting. As I said, people are being laid off right now as we speak.
Okay, we're coming to the end. I just want to ask you, because last time we spoke, it was obviously at the height of the tensions between India and Pakistan. And President Trump has said since then on multiple occasions that he played an instrumental role in helping to defuse that situation and avert, he said, nuclear war. I want to ask how important you think that role was played by the US president and his administration. And what is the state of affairs now with India and Pakistan? How do we avoid a repeat of those sorts of tensions?
Well, on the first one, Thomas, as I mentioned to you when we spoke during the conflict, India never needed persuading. India's message was consistent throughout. We're just conducting reprisals against terrorists, that as far as we're concerned, if Pakistan hits us, we'll have to hit back. If Pakistan stops, we'll stop. And from the Indian point of view, the moment the Pakistani Director General of Military Operations called his Indian counterpart and said, look, we want to call this off, India immediately said, we'll call it off. So India never needed persuading. But it's entirely possible that President Trump or people speaking on his behalf persuaded Pakistan, that Pakistan was being belligerent and the Americans said, we don't want this getting out of hand, cool it. And the Pakistanis yielded to Mr. Trump's entreaties, in which case, of course, we're grateful. Everyone wants peace on the subcontinent, India most of all. So I don't think that we would have any difficulty in crediting Mr. Trump for whatever he may have said to Pakistan. But we just wanted to make it very clear that he didn't say anything to us. In fact, he didn't call Mr. Trump between his first condolence call after the terrorist attack by the Pakistani terrorists and his subsequent call to Mr. Modi after they missed each other at the G7 summit in Ottawa, when Mr. Trump cut short his trip and had to miss his meeting, his scheduled meeting with Mr. Modi. Between those two calls, there was no call between President Trump and Mr. Modi. And that's what's important for all of us to make clear. We are not a country that accepts the notion of mediation. Mediation implies equivalence, and we believe there can be no equivalence between terrorists and their victims. There can be no equivalence between a country that incubates terrorism and a country that is on the receiving end of these criminal actions. There can be no equivalent between a revisionist power that wants to upset the entire geopolitics of the subcontinent, change borders, and so on, and a country like India that's a status quo power that wants to get on with its development, get on with its economic growth, and focus on the well-being of its own people. There is no equivalence. And there's no equivalence, there can be no mediation. So we made it very clear that we don't welcome American or anybody else's mediation, but we certainly welcome, and we have great respect for the American presidency. If Mr. President or his officials spoke to the Pakistanis and got them to climb down so that we're now at peace on the border, that's a good thing for everybody. And we are at peace. You asked how things are with Pakistan. There have been no particular new tensions, no new incidents, no new violence, no new shelling, nothing of that sort. So at the moment, the peace that came about at the end of Operation Sindoor is holding. And that's the best we can say. But I don't know what Mr. Trump said to Washington, to Islamabad. And if he's certainly seeking credit for that, he probably deserves it. But as far as India is concerned, he didn't play any role in persuading us, nor did we need any role of persuasion.
Okay, this is my last question to you, Dr. Tharoor. You've been very generous with your time. You've got a huge social media following. Our last interview together delivered an enormous view count. And a lot of your supporters, when I look in the comment section, are asking the same question. Does Dr. Tharoor have prime ministerial ambitions? What's the answer?
Oh, my word. The answer is there is no vacancy. And look, I mean, in a parliamentary system, no one can aspire to any specific job. You aspire to do your best for the constituency that elected you, which in my case is Thiruvananthapuram, which you pronounced so ably when you interviewed me last. And that's where I'm focused. But have had a long association with world affairs and international questions. I care passionately about them, and I chair the Parliamentary Standing Committee on External Affairs. So I focus on these topics as part of my parliamentary duties, not because of any prime ministerial ambitions. But thank you for asking.
But you wouldn't turn it down?
Oh, come on, don't ask questions that I don't particularly think is wise to answer. But as I said, there is no vacancy. We'll have to talk about real situations and not hypothetical ones, as we've been doing in this conversation.
All right, well, we look forward to continuing the conversation, and we really appreciate your time today. Dr. Shashi Tharoor, thank you very much indeed, sir.
Thank you, Tom. All the best.
Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Navtej Sarna, who is the former Indian ambassador to the United States, also to the United Kingdom. Ambassador Sarna, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. And I just want to pick up on what we were talking about there with Shashi Tharoor before we spoke to you. We were talking about the summit of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is being held in the Chinese city of Tianjin. And one analyst is quoted as saying that President Trump is rattled by India, China and Russia coming together, and he wants to try and split up this emerging partnership. Do you think that's true?
Well, I can't speak for President Trump, but it's quite possible that the symbolism of the summit and the three leaders meeting together in an obvious situation of some comfort, I think would have disturbed President Trump. I'm not sure that that was the intention of all of them, but it could be a part of the subtext.
Indeed, and I mean, we've seen the pictures, and we were talking about it just a moment ago, pictures of even Prime Minister Modi and President Putin holding hands. They're talking about a special relationship. I mean, do you think India is trying to send a message here to Washington?
Well, two things here. I think one, the India-Russia relationship is not something that is new. I think it goes back much into our history for the last 60 years or so, at least since 1971. It's been a consistent support for India. And we have, held that relationship and we call it time-tested. At the same time, we have been building up the India-US relationship for the last 25 years, and we have managed to successfully carry on both relationships, not always consistently. I mean, there have been ups and downs, but I think it has been in the strategic interest of both Russia and US, as well as India, to keep all these equations going at the same time. Now, what has happened is because of Mr. Trump's actions and statements not only by the president, but people around him, that the trust factor in the India-US relationship has been severely damaged. And obviously, it's not that we are now suddenly reaching out to Russia, but yes, there is an element of signaling here. There is an element of diplomatic theater here, that India has options. India has other relationships. We are not giving up on the US relationship, but we are also reviving and strengthening the others.
Okay, but if I were to put on my American hat, and I'm not American, but the Americans are angered. They say the underlying cause of all of this tension and the reason Mr. Trump did what he did and imposed those tariffs is simple. Russia has been selling oil to China and India using these so-called dark fleets to transport it. And that money is funding Russia's war effort in Ukraine. So don't you think Washington is justified in being irritated, to say the very least?
I think that's a highly inconsistent view. if that was truly Washington's view, they would have imposed higher tariffs on China, which imports much more Russian oil than India did. And by the way, Indian imports of Russian oil have been declining, not because of Mr. Trump's statements, but because the discounts have been going down. As well, I mean, Mr. Trump has not held that view as far as Europe is concerned, which continues to import gas from Russia. So I think that is a sort of facile view that India is funding Ukraine's war. I mean, you can't lay the blame of not being able to end the Russia-Ukraine war at India's doorstep.
Clearly, you're watching all of this on playing out and on your television screen, and probably remembering with affection your time in Washington. At the same time, you're probably thinking how you might advise President Donald Trump to deal with New Delhi, knowing as you do both cultures extremely well. What would your advice be to him?
I would say that he should go back to Trump 1.0. We made a lot of progress in Trump's first term, because India was still being seen through a strategic lens. India was being seen as a crucial linchpin of the Indo-Pacific policy, as a huge market, as a supplier of technically qualified people, helping a lot of the tech industry in the United States. India is a democracy. India is a pluralistic country and has a lot of fundamental convergences with the United States. It is very odd that all the progress, all the strategic progress that was made in Trump's first term, possibly under the guidance of some of his advisors at that time, has been thrown to the winds in one summer. And it's not just that. This has been a steadily growing relationship, whether the person in the White House was a Democrat or a Republican, ever since President Bill Clinton. I would suggest, hardly in my place to advise a president, but I would suggest to the Trump whisperers that please go back to the drawing board and see that you are actually committing suicide by doing this to the India-US relationship.
And obviously one of the techniques that President Trump uses is, obviously he's keen on social media, meaning that quite a lot of diplomatic discussion is carried out in a rather public way, i.e. it gets posted on Truth Social or one of the other platforms. How do you think that goes down in New Delhi?
Well, I think, at one time, this was a sort of attractive disruption to rather old-fashioned diplomacy. Today, it shows that there is no policy in Washington. Today, it shows that there is no analysis in Washington. So if you're announcing foreign policy, major foreign policy initiatives and decisions via tweet, then obviously it hasn't gone through the grill that these serious relationships deserve. So today it is, I'm afraid, it's become a mockery of foreign policy relationships. And I think it's not going to help anybody, but most important, it's not going to help the United States.
Okay, any pointers perhaps for your Prime Minister? I don't know if you're in touch with Prime Minister Modi on these issues. Perhaps you're not allowed to say. But would you say there are any techniques that you've noticed that might go down well in terms of bringing about a constructive dialogue with this new administration in Washington?
Well, I think a lot of countries have tried flattery of President Trump. A lot of countries have tried sort of cajoling him by investments and even offers of aeroplanes and all that. I think the time for all that is over. Certainly, it is not in India's DNA to come to the relationship like that. Yes, we can do things to project India's investments. We can do things to meet genuine American concerns. But India will continue, and I don't need to advise anybody. I think I can see it's already happening. India will continue to approach this relationship with patience, with restraint, and with dignity. And we will hope that in the end, a lot of the work that has been done for a quarter of a century will not go waste, because there are fundamental strategic logics and reasons behind that work. And I think once this phase is over, I believe that this, all phases go over. I think we have to bide our time. And we have to go back to building that relationship which has been built block by block in mutual interest of both countries. It's a very valuable relationship, not just for us, not just for the United States, but I think for global politics.
Indeed, and when we were talking to Dr. Shashi Tharoor before we crossed to you, he used a cricketing analogy, suggesting that India was going to have to pad up to protect itself from what are going to be some quite fast-spun balls heading in its direction. But just turning our eye back to China and that conference that was held there, and yesterday we heard President Xi Jinping talking about global turmoil, tumultuous international relations. He also talked about bullying tactics being used by certain powers, and clearly pointing the finger there at Washington. How much of a chord do you think that struck with Prime Minister Narendra Modi? Do you think he listened to that and thought, this is somebody speaking my kind of language?
Yes, sure. I don't think that was meant for Prime Minister Modi. I think it was meant for President Trump. And I think that is part of the signaling that China, in particular, is doing as a emerging superpower, as a challenger to the United States. That listen, there is another worldview. I don't think it means that India and China, and in fact Russia, there are sort of teaming up against President Trump as a sort of club. But I think there is that kind of signaling, which at the moment suits everybody. It will not change the fundamentals of the India-China relationship, which we are seeing some amount of engagement. We are seeing some amount of easing of the thaw or improvement in the thaw that started actually last year. It will not remove the fundamental doubts, the fundamental questions of the India-China relationship. So I would desist from seeing this as a great breakthrough, as a major shift in India's policy, as a teaming up or falling into China's arms. I mean, all that, again, is neither true nor helpful.
Okay, so you don't seem to be of the view that India's at a crossroads. It's having to choose. Does it turn left towards that China-Russia-led axis? Does it keep going straight ahead and continue with the US collective West, or does it try to find a third way? You would discount all of that.
Well, I don't think these are zero-sum situations. I don't think countries like India, which are not which are actually civilizational powers more than anything else, and it's been our pronounced policy for the last 75 years that our policy is what is in India's interests. We will take decisions on that basis, whether you call it non-alignment, multi-alignment, strategic autonomy. Fundamentally, it means the same. So I don't think that we will be tilting from left to right and back to left if everything happens well. I think India will use this opportunity to go back to the drawing board, to understand that over-dependence on any country, on any one relationship, be it with the United States, is not in India's interest. And we will continue to see which relationship serves our interest at a particular time. There are certain limitations to each of these relationships, and there are advantages to each of these relationships. And I think Indian foreign policy is fairly experienced. They're old hands at this. And I think they will be able to manage this crisis. It should not be seen as a zero-sum game at all.
Just lastly, Ambassador Sarna, I mean, I'm imagining this issue of tariffs is the focus of considerable press interest. It's probably a subject of continued debate on the airwaves there in India. I'm wondering what sort of adjectives people are using to describe the relationship between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Trump, and what public opinion is on all of this. What are people saying?
I think that's a very interesting aspect of things. There was a lot of skepticism in India historically about a very close relationship with the United States, that you really can't trust the United States as a partner. And slowly we have built up that trust. Unfortunately, that trust, as I mentioned earlier, has been severely damaged. The language that has been used for India, and President Trump called India's economy, which is the fastest growing emerging economy, a dead economy. Now that sort of thing doesn't help. We've been called tariff kings, while there are analyses out there which tell you that several other countries are actually much higher tariffs, particularly trade-weighted tariffs, not just simple averages or simple numbers. So I think the feeling here is that we've been let down by the United States, that there is an unjustified attack on India, which is neither related to Russia or to oil, but it seems to be targeting India's rise. It seems to be trying to constrain India's growth. And this has to be taken seriously by us. And I think there's a lot of public opinion, there's a lot of analysis how to handle the tariff issue if the tariffs do stay. I mean, they are being challenged in the American courts. But if the tariffs do stay, how do we handle them? How do we find new markets? How do we do internal economic reforms and bring back manufacturing to India? How do we relieve the pressure on the jobs which will be lost because of falling exports to the United States? So these are questions for the government. They're not easy questions, but I think at the moment it is a sort of, there is a sense of defiance. There is a sense of independence that has been invoked in India. It's an old sort of sense of feeling that when the world discriminates against you, or a particular country discriminates against you for no obvious reason, then we have to turn to our own resources.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Navtej Sarna, former Indian ambassador to the United States, thank you very much indeed for your time, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, as well as the Indian Prime Minister, the Russian President Vladimir Putin is also in China at that same summit, while the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is this week holding talks with European leaders in Paris. Well, that, of course, in the context of the ongoing war with Russia. Well, President Putin is in China alongside 25 other heads of state, including North Korea's Kim Jong-un. This as Western leaders look on. Well, in China, President Putin has brushed off claims that Moscow would target Europe if it won in Ukraine. He also said that Russia never had an issue with Ukraine joining the European Union, but made it clear that NATO membership was, in his words, unacceptable. Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Alessandro Minuto-Rizzo, who is the former Secretary General of NATO, who joins us now from Rome. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. We really appreciate it. We gather that the Ukrainian president is going to be meeting the NATO Secretary General and also the leaders of Germany and the United Kingdom in Paris on Thursday. I think everyone knows that security guarantees are going to be the key topic of discussion. I mean, what's the point of those security guarantees? What's your understanding?
Well, on the one hand, you're right, saying this is a central point. On the other hand, in a diplomatic experience, it's very complicated to have guarantees before an agreement. Usually you have an agreement, and in the meanwhile you discuss the guarantees. We don't know really, in fact, what will be the end game of this war. But so to discuss, if you send troops there or not, is extremely, how can I say, complicated on one hand. On the other, I don't want to be nasty in any way, because I understand exactly all the difficulties of this crucial moment. But on the other hand, it may also look like you avoid the real issue, because the real issue is the conditions under which you can have a peace there, which means territory, land, use of the Russian language, the Russian church in Ukraine, and the new government, things of this kind, These things have not been touched up today. This is very important, So I'm not sure that if you want me to develop that, to be sure that the meeting in Paris is symbolically important. I agree on that. But, the fact that you think about that, in a technical way, to have a European sort of army somewhere in the middle of Ukraine, and even you have to, even logistically, to sustain that over time. And then what, if you have really an hypothetical Russian aggression in a few years, then what? Then this kind of force should fight the Russians. It looks to me a very complicated thing that I'm not sure will see the light of the day in the end. Also because the Russians, I don't think they would agree on this.
Well, in fact, Russia has just today said, having long said they wouldn't accept the presence of Western troops in Ukraine. Today, President Putin said he thinks that consensus on security guarantees for Ukraine is possible. He did once again repeat that Ukraine would never be allowed to join NATO. But don't you find it slightly bizarre that we have the president of Russia dictating what security guarantees can and can't look like? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, of course. What you say is obvious. I mean, it is ridiculous that you have the aggressor, Mr. Putin, telling the aggressed, what kind of guarantees they should have in the future, and what kind of guarantees they had when they were attacked 3 years ago. So, it's all this is very bizarre from a diplomatic point of view. And also it has the disadvantage, to my mind, to be on television every day, Diplomacy, we know that, all of us, with every country in the world, has always been a very confidential matter, because there are certain things that you can negotiate only in confidence. And perhaps you would only say that outside the smaller group when things are agreed. It is obvious. I'm not saying anything special, So now we have, if we want to go back, we have this, okay, the good news is that we have a beginning in Alaska, a beginning of negotiation. But then you have, in fact, what? The president of Russia going to the United States, he's received full honors. We don't know exactly what kind of concessions he made, if he made concessions. And in fact, he got a recognition on an international point of view that he had never had in the past 10 or 15 years. So it is a big gift that has been given to Mr. Putin. Of course, in diplomacy, you can also make gifts. Why not, But what have we received in exchange of that? Apparently nothing, because this discussion about the meeting with President Zelensky is not going anywhere, as far as we know. And I have the impression, like many other analysts, that in fact, Mr. Trump may skip away at a certain point, say, these guys are too difficult, they are not really willing to make peace, I am the president of the United States, why should I really, involve my country completely, in something which is so difficult, where people don't ask and don't follow my advice? This is also a danger, because in that case, you would have the Europeans who have to take the full responsibility. They're already doing that, by the way, in part. But, having full responsibility of supporting Ukraine. That will be, again, another difficult passage.
So what do you think, what would be your overall assessment of President Trump's efforts so far to broker peace? I mean, do you rate his chances of being able to deliver something as being high, or you think at this stage it looks on the low side?
It is very difficult to answer that. We know that Mr. Trump has a big, how can I say, confidence in himself, And he says several times In 24 hours, it will be over. If it was not for me, it would never have started. Things like that. And then he keeps repeating, if you notice, over time, that, in 2 weeks' time, I will decide what to do if Russia is not, following my advice. But these 2 weeks have been repeatedly passed over and nothing is happening. So in my humble view, in my modest opinion, Mr. Trump is not going to sanction directly Mr. Putin unless he feels really offended personally, which is not likely to happen soon, So he really hopes, I think, that Ukraine gives up. We know, because this is already something that we know, that what really the Russians would like to have, and this is important, the meat of the negotiation, they would like to have not only the land that they occupy at present time, they also want to have this part of Donbass, which has not yet been occupied by them. And that it is very difficult to conquer, by the way. It may take 6 months to a year. So, and Crimea, of course. And then they want the recognition of Russian language. They want the recognition of the Russian church. And they want what they call denazification of Ukraine, which in other words, I think means that Zelensky has to go away. All this is very difficult to achieve. And I don't think, that we are there. There is, if I may continue on this line of reasoning, I think that from this point on, after the delusion, let's say after Anchorage and the summit in Washington, after the delusion, now very much is public diplomacy in a way, what the different parts say publicly. And I think that the Europeans have to be very careful. It is very important for Europeans, I think, to be substantially, yes, continuing to support Ukraine, because it's a good thing to do, but at the same time saying, yes, we want peace, we want agreement, we want a meeting, because from the recent developments I speak about television appearances, of course, not other things. What it looks like is that Trump is telling everybody, you have to meet together, maybe I will come, have to be reasonable. The Russians say it's all fault of Zelensky, we don't like him, they really don't want peace. And the Europeans at a certain point seems to be those who want to continue the war, which of course is not true, but they have to be very careful in terms of what is said outside. I think the Europeans should say, yes, we want peace, and keep the same position. So it is not easy to attack them, because what is coming up, I think, in public opinion, in Europe, for instance, is that some Europeans at least, some people that would like to continue the war in a way or in another, which I don't think is correct. I don't think it's fair. So there is really a problem of the way the European leaders express themselves. They have to be very careful of that.
Okay, well, one country that's trying to do things its way is NATO member Turkey, which has kept its communications channels open with both Moscow and Kyiv since the start of the invasion, and has been trying to mediate between the two. Do you think the Turkish stand a better chance at this stage than the United States?
I don't know. This is very difficult to say, because it is true that it is certainly an historic fact that President Erdogan has asked many times to be a mediator. There have been meetings in Istanbul, etc. But when the game became, let's say, too large, he sort of stepped away, because the President of the United States said that he wanted to be the person in charge of the entire thing, probably thinking that it was easier than in fact it is, because this is the issue. Probably President Trump thinks that thought that it was very easy to have the two presidents sitting together. But then, we have also very, how can I say, very strange details. Because, for instance, Mr. Witkoff, the representative of President Trump, went to Moscow several times. Last time he went there, and it was before the Anchorage meeting, what came out of the meeting was that the Russians looked like available to give back the Donbass. And in fact, it was a complete misunderstanding. Then we understood that, from what it comes out of the press at least, that Mr. Wittek had no interpreter. He had to rely on the interpreter of Mr. Putin, which again, in a diplomatic, sensitive negotiation, this is very, how can I say, superficial, if it is true.
Okay, so clearly you're concerned about that. We're coming to the end of this interview, but I just want to ask you, I mean, just today we heard President Putin saying the idea that Moscow poses a threat to Europe is, quote, complete nonsense. And we've also heard from the current NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte that the threat from Russia is increasing every day. Let's not be naive about it, he said. Whose side are you on?
Well,
I think I know.
Well, if you speak about a possible accession of Ukraine to NATO, I don't think it's in the card, to use Trump language. I don't think it's in the cards because there is no consensus of that. It is certainly unacceptable to the Russians, so it will not going to be there. So no NATO membership. But on the other hand, you can have the European Union. So everybody seems to forget that the path to accession to the European Union is a long one, is a technical one, of course. There are many conditions to be met in terms of things like environmental protection, whatever. But in the end, there is also a defense dimension which is going to be built in Europe. So Ukraine doesn't come to NATO, but then it comes to Ukraine, to European Union, perhaps in 5 or 10 years' time. It may be part of a European system, including the UK in some way, perhaps. So the Russia would not be happy again. You know, this is the thing.
Okay, well, we'll have to see how events pan out, but we're out of time. We appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Alessandro Minuto-Rizzo, the former Secretary General of NATO. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you to you. It's a very, very complicated issue, very difficult issue, and I don't think that peace is really behind the corner. That's the conclusion that I have for today.
Okay, thank you. Now turning our attention to this region, the Middle East, and Iraq's ruling alliance has put efforts on hold to pass a law that would give sweeping powers to the Iran-backed Popular Mobilization Forces. Well, that's in a bid to ease tensions with Washington. Well, the draft legislation opposed by the United States would have formalized the PMF, which is a coalition of mostly armed groups comprising around 200,000 fighters, as a parallel structure alongside the Defense Ministry. Well, let's cross now to Baghdad, and we can speak to Dr. Hussein Allawi, who is an advisor for security sector reform in the Prime Minister's office there in Iraq. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us, Dr. Allawi. I just want to start by asking you a very basic question, because we haven't spoken about the situation in Iraq for some time on this channel. And I just want to know what the security situation in Iraq is like today and how it compares to, say, 10 years ago.
Yeah, thank you for the interview. Now the Iraqi stability, the peace bear time, and the Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani to lead the process about the end mission for the global coalition and the transition, the relationship bilateral with the United States, with all countries to participate with Iraqi armed forces before 11 years to defeat the ISIS. Now the military readiness for the Iraqi armed forces is very strong, and the evaluation, the Iraqi Joint Operation Command, it is very good for the Iraqi armed forces, representatives from the Minister of Defense and the all ministries and entity in security sector. For also the Iraqi government now it is supported the peace bear time and development the progress after the 3 years to implement many targeting in Iraqi program for the Iraqi government, to support it from Iraqi parliament, and the public opinion satisfied for the Iraqi government and the activity for the Iraqi armed forces and the security. It is open the investment bare time now in Iraq, and Iraqi government, after the 3 years to lead from the government for Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, $100 billion. It is a good number, after to more activity in security and to transition the state from the war and the peace. For also now it is the stability in Iraq in all provinces, especially in the Liberty Zone, and the control the all border with the neighborhood for the state for Iraq.
Okay, Dr. Allawi, you paint a good picture there of the situation. It seems like things have improved enormously from the times of the conflict with ISIS. There are now, obviously, and you mentioned it there is this process of the US withdrawal from your country. Some are calling for the complete withdrawal of US troops from your country. Do you support those calls?
Yeah, it is a good question. Now we focus the concept in Iraq, the end mission, according to join the statement in September 2024, for also implement the all item, this deal between Iraqi armed forces and the Iraqi government with the all countries from the global coalition. The ISIS now no threat, and in addition, no priority the threat for the environment security in Iraq. Maybe the drugs the first the threat, because the priority for the national security strategy for Iraq stated in 2025 and 2013. It is classified the ISIS the second threat for the security environment. For also now to more deal with the United States about the new relationship in security sector. In addition, we rebag about the strategic framework between Iraqi government and the US government about to implement and to rebag before the Mosul collapse. Because the global coalition, when Mosul collapsed in 2014, to establish the global coalition from 86 the states and to participate with Iraqi armed forces to defeat ISIS. But in 2017, the Iraqi government and the former the Prime Minister to try to end the global coalition, but the failure in 2017. But continue the Iraqi government, former the Prime Minister Haidar al-Abadi, and after that former Prime Minister Adil Abdel Mahdi, and the former Prime Minister Mr. Kadhimi, to resolve the problem. But after came to Mohammed Shia al-Sudani as a Prime Minister in 2022 to resolve the problem, because it is obligate and adapt to transition the mission for the global coalition and bilateral to lead the bilateral the relationship with the US, with the UK, with all countries from the Europe countries and the Australia and Canadian and all members for global coalition. But now to implement two phases. In September in 2025 to leave from Baghdad and Anbar, the advisory board for delegate for global coalition, and in 2026 to the end mission for the global coalition in the KRG area. But we now to transition the relationship between the all countries, bilateral, for also reback to agreement with the US, agreement with the UK, agreement with Spain, with German, with all countries from the Europe countries about to continue the relationship in defense sector with Iraqi armed forces, also to focus in terrorist group or anything to threat for the security region and the global region.
Okay, I mean, just looking at
global security, sorry.
Sure. I mean, obviously Iraq occupies an extremely important place on the map. And on the western border, you have Syria. On the eastern border, you have Iran. And of course, there have been tensions between the United States and Iran. They've heightened in recent months. There's been a change of leadership in Syria. So a lot has been happening on your borders. I want to ask you specifically with regards to Iran. President Trump wants your Prime Minister, Mohammed Shia Sudani, to cut off economic and military ties with Iran. What does Baghdad say to that?
Yeah, I think the relationship between Iraqi government with the U.S. government, it is excellent. It is the strategic level now. It is to more deal between them about to continue and estrange the relationship. And second, the border in Syria have legacy for the 3 generations from terrorist group anytime to threat Iraq. But now, after to arrangement from the Iraqi armed forces to control in this area and to good management from the border guard and to support it from Iraqi armed forces, it is very strong, the border. In addition, now the Iraqi state have a vision about maybe a new initiative in diplomatic initiative to seize the conflict in MENA region, to reduce the tension and to encourage the United States and Iran to reback to more negotiation about to more deal the stability and to seize the tension between them. Also, after to receive the Mr. Mohammed Shia Sudani call from French state about to support it, the Iraqi activity, the new initiative or the diplomatic initiative, maybe it is a good opportunity for the region and the global about to resolve the problem. No tension in MENA region about the war claim and the wartime.
Okay, but Dr. Allawi, how would you characterize Iraq's stance with regards to these tensions between the United States and Iran? Would you say Iraq is neutral in those tensions?
Yeah, we hope to reduce the tension between them, because no need look at again the war in the MENA region, because it is not easy to reduce or to control in this phenomena, because Iraqi have a stereotype to 40 years to suffering from the war. For also Iraqi government to support it and to reback the more negotiation between Iran and the United States, but based on the time, based on the government in the Iran and the United States. In addition, we need to work with all powers in the MENA region and the global, especially the French and the UK and any state, to support the new initiative about to reduce the tension in MENA region.
Okay, we were saying before we crossed you, we were talking about this effort to cut the powers of the Iran-backed Popular Mobilization Forces, the PMF as they're called. And Iran and the leadership in Iran is very keen that that group should not be disbanded. And yet when we look at the countries where Iran has influence, some might call it interference, I'm talking about Yemen, Lebanon, previously Syria. I mean, isn't there a sense that perhaps it's better to keep Iran out of your country's domestic affairs?
Now the Prime Minister Mohammed Shia Sudani, it is control this phenomena, about to separate it between the factions and BMF. BMF, it is have a seat in Iraqi Joint Operation Command. It is obligate any order from the General Commander for Iraqi Armed Forces. But the functions to work, يعني the Iraqi government with all parties and the blocs to collect the Iraqi government about the political dialogue. With the political dialogue, it is success. يعني after the Gaza crisis and influence in 2023, influence on the يعني Iraqi environment directly, but the Iraqi government, it is success with يعني uses the blocs and parties in the coordination framework and the state alliance already to members from the all parties in Iraq to support the Iraqi government and to support the Prime Minister to more dialogue and to resolve the stability. And now after 2 years it is stability. We hope to continue, because if you to resolve the problem in MENA region and to reduce and cease the tension in the claim MENA region, it is reflected good and reflect directly on the stability and to support the stability in Iraq.
Okay, I just want to ask you lastly, I mean, you mentioned a bit earlier on about Mosul, that city in Iraq that was under control of militants for some time. And in the last couple of days, we've seen your Prime Minister there inaugurating a new airport in Mosul. This was, of course, an airport that was destroyed by ISIS. We've also seen the reopening of a key mosque there in Mosul, the Al-Nuri Mosque. I'm just wondering how symbolic those two events are in sort of really illustrating the extent to which Iraq has reconstructed and rebuilt itself.
Yani, by the way, the first thank you for international community to support my country about rebuilding the Nuri Mosque and opening from yesterday the Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani with the governor for the Nainawa. In addition, I think it is a good sign يعني, about to debate ISIS and to reback the stability in Iraq and the MENA region, and we hope to continue the stability in the MENA region, because it's very important, the activity and to counter violent extremism and enhancing to more cooperated in MENA region, about to focus the economic, to more cooperated about many projects in this sector. In addition, we hope to continue يعني, to debate terrorist group in the MENA region in the world, because we need to remove this culture. We need to encourage the culture for to cooperated between the all countries, in addition to reflect in the youth in the MENA region, because it's very important to look at the new model about to rehabilitation from the war for the development progress. Also, the Iraqi government now, it is continue to support this activity in the region and the world.
All right, well, we're going to have to leave there because we're out of time, but we really appreciate you speaking to us, and we wish you and the Iraqi government all the best with those reconstruction efforts. Dr. Hussein Allawi, thank you very much indeed for your time, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.